Hi, this is Sean from Greenlight Studios, and we're here with Lynette Amirault, and we're going to talk about, well, you'll see what we're going to talk about because she is a professional, and I'll basically just let you introduce yourself and you'll let us know what you are a professional in.
Okay, thanks, Sean.
You're welcome.
So I'm actually a dietitian. I've been working as a dietitian for almost 25 years. It'll be my 25th year this year. I work in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. So I've spent most of my career working at the Yarmouth Hospital, but I've also been working as an independent contractor, and I work with a couple of different companies as an independent contractor, providing education and counseling and support to patients who are living with obesity.
Fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're obviously, you said you were a self-proclaimed nerd about this, so statistics and there's a passion behind it. When you say the word nerd, I think so.
Very much so. So working with people at my job at the hospital, a lot of stuff around weight comes up. So over the years, I did more studies, I went to conferences, and so what came of it was I ended up getting certified as a bariatric educator through Obesity Canada. And I did that in 2018, but that actually came after many years of extra study and learning and things like that. So I've probably been really focused on this area of work for the last decade of my career. Yeah.
Right on. So on LinkedIn, your profile, there's a title under your name. And is that what you just said? Or is there, it seems to me it was longer or something like that.
So I'm certified bariatric educator through Obesity Canada. I also had SCOPE certification, which is actually an international certification in obesity. But that organization actually stopped providing certification to North America. So I technically am no longer SCOPE certified, even though I used to be, because they're no longer recognizing that certification in North America. But that's just...
Well, I guess we won't get into that one because it doesn't matter, I guess. But there's obviously some good that could come from it, but yeah.
Yep.
So let's get into like obesity. That's, you're dealing with childhood or just obesity in general?
I don't work a lot with kids. So in my old roles at the hospital, I did see some children, but certainly it's not my area of expertise. Adults are really my jam.
Your jam, yeah. Right on.
Adults that have control of their own lives is kind of where it's at for me.
Right on.
So in my role at the hospital, I actually don't focus a whole lot on obesity, except to say that a lot of the patients that we have that come in have obesity. But really where I do most of the work regarding obesity is in my independent contractor work. So work with a couple different companies, one of which is a pharmaceutical company, and I provide support to patients who are using certain medications. But my other role is with a company called Medical Weight Management Centre of Canada, and that's where we actually do a lot of good work, working with people who sign up for a year-long program, and we do behavior management counseling.
Behavior management. Wow. So I'm going to simplify this a little bit for me, from my understanding, but when it comes to dieting and just my take on it, it's oftentimes calories in, calories out, you are what you eat kind of thing. However, there are these cases where some people gain weight and they're doing all the right things. Am I right?
100%.
Are those, you can probably have clients from both of those people, like people who just aren't doing the right thing and a little tweak can help. And people who are doing the right thing, but it's like, why isn't that working?
100%. So most of our clientele is actually in that latter category where they've tried diets before. Maybe they've lost weight through a diet, but they weren't able to maintain that weight loss. And they've probably tried numerous times and they get so frustrated and they say, what am I doing wrong? And the fact is they're not doing anything wrong. It's diet culture that's telling them the wrong thing.
Interesting.
So unfortunately, yes, calories in, calories out it's a real thing. It's physics. But our physiology messes with those physics. So what diet culture doesn't tell you, because you couldn't sell a product if this was the disclaimer, is that when you go on a diet to lose weight through just calorie restriction alone, your body does not like that very much.
Okay.
And so it has these correction mechanisms in place to make you gain the weight back. And it does that through a bunch of different hormones that our body produces. So there's a couple different mechanisms in the brain that are at a subconscious level that we cannot control. And those mechanisms increase our hunger hormones, decrease our satiety hormones, making it really, really difficult to maintain that calorie deficit over time.
So it's like unsustainable.
So a lot of times diets become unsustainable, especially if you have the genes that predispose you to weight gain. And most of us do.
Interesting.
Yeah. So most of us have those genes because they come from a part of our brain and a part of our physiology that kept us alive when we were cavemen. So if we didn't have those genes, we wouldn't have survived.
Yeah, so it's your body doing the best thing it can to protect you.
Exactly.
It may not need these programs in this day and age, but it still runs these old ancient biology.
100%. It's ancient biology that met the needs of humans when we were struggling for survival, but now we live in this totally different environment and there's food everywhere. So we've got brains that are trained to say, when you see food, you should eat it.
Okay.
But guess what? We're seeing food all the time. We see food in places that it shouldn't be. So when you go to the gas station, what are you going to the gas station for?
Gas.
But what do you see when you go in to pay?
Potato chips.
Chocolate covered potato chips.
Double awesome.
So the biggest predictor of what we eat is what we're exposed to. Can't eat what you don't have, but we have so much. So we have this brain that says when you see food you should eat it, and we're seeing food all of the time. And so if you're actually, trying to maintain a calorie deficit, that's really, really, really difficult. So the folks that, are able to just lose weight and keep it off, more than likely don't have an abundance of those obesogenic genes.
Is that like ghrelin and stuff like that? All right.
Yep. So ghrelin is a hunger hormone.
Yeah.
It's a hunger hormone that's produced in our stomach. So when our stomach's empty, it bubbles up the ghrelin, and that goes to our brain, and it switches on the part of our brain that says, you should be looking for food now.
Okay.
You should go looking for food. And then you're triggered, right? So anytime that you see food, ooh, that looks good. When you're watching TV and you see a commercial, ooh, that looks good. You might not have that food in your cupboard, but it makes you get up and go look.
Okay.
And then you end up eating something else. So ghrelin is definitely a hunger hormone. It's also a stress hormone.
Okay.
So when we're stressed, we feel more hungry. We feel more triggered. We have more cravings.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just very infuriating.
I think stress has got to be the monkey wrench into maintaining sometimes, because it there's cortisol involved. There's fight or flight, I think.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah. So these are kinds of things that I've kind of recently took more of an interest in. So I don't know it all. I'm definitely not an expert in all of those other hormones. The appetite hormones that I'm much more familiar in are things like leptin and ghrelin and GLP-1, GIP.
Yeah.
Those kind of on-off switches.
Later on.
Yeah, they're like on-off switches.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just gonna add a few questions right now. I know we're gonna get right into it, but back in the day, there was insulin, and there still is insulin.
Yes.
But as far as being able to control it with your diet, even if obviously if you're diabetic, then you'd want to watch that. But even non-diabetic people were looking at the glycemic index and staying away from the white potatoes or the white rice or anything, sugars. I don't know if people are still, obviously if you're diabetic, you're still conscious of those things. How about the regular person? Are we conscious of high glycemic foods?
I want to say the average person in North America is not really conscious about food.
Okay.
Period.
General, yeah.
In general.
Yeah.
But in general, the glycemic index applies to everybody.
Yeah.
So the glycemic index is just how long does it take for that food that you eat to get digested and turned into energy in your bloodstream. Energy being sugar. So glycemic index is only applied to really carbohydrate containing foods. So it pertains to everybody, but it only causes problems in people who might have problems with their blood sugars Or if they're noticing that, gee, when I eat this food, I get an energy crash afterwards and I don't feel good. That might have to do with, how quickly the carbohydrate breaks down and turns into sugar, and then your body's response to that being insulin to put it into your cells. Insulin's function is to move energy into cells.
And you need that. It's a good thing.
You need that. Yeah. It's a very good thing.
Yeah.
My husband has type 1 diabetes. He doesn't make his own insulin. He needs to wear a pump that pumps the insulin into him when he needs it. So technology is great, and things have come really a long way to understand, like, even, I say my career's been 25 years long. How we approach diabetes is very different now compared to how we did 25 years ago. Totally different. That's because ultimately nutrition is a really young science. So, think about things like chemistry and biology. We've been studying those for like centuries. But nutrition is a really young science. Like, we didn't understand why people were dying of scurvy 200 years ago.
Okay. It's
like, we didn't know
obvious.
We didn't know that there was such a thing as vitamins
that
affected humans' health 200 years ago. Right?
Yeah.
So it's a very young science. And so we keep learning these things. And as we know more, we do better. But that creates a problem in the world of nutrition, because sometimes we say one thing and then 10 years later we say something else.
Okay.
And that's due to evolving science, but people see it as, well, they don't know what they're talking about. So it lends a credibility issue sometimes.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
So a follow-up question, I guess. Where was I going with this?
So you were asking about glycemic index, and I got off track.
That's all good.
I'm going to do that a lot today.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I had something to ask you, but let's talk about the BMI.
Okay.
Because, traditionally you would take your height and your weight.
Yep.
And then if I'm 145 pounds, this BMI index would say you need to be 155, and you're obviously obese now. And I'm looking at it saying, what would I look like if I was 155? Right.
Yeah.
So how are we talking about BMI today?
So let's start by talking about what BMI is.
Okay.
So BMI is a measure of your weight divided by your height, essentially. So it's your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. And it gives you a number. So most people's BMI falls between, if you're very, very thin, it might be in the teens. If you're unhealthy thin, it might be in the teens. If you're what we would consider to be a normal weight person, which there's a whole lot of problems with that. Your BMI might fall between 20 and 25 or 30.
Is that body fat percentage? Is that no?
And then, when we're getting up into the BMIs, up into the 30s, up into the 40s, up into the 50s, we're talking about people that are carrying excess weight. But BMI is a measure of weight over height. It doesn't know what that weight is made up of. So women who are pregnant have an elevated BMI. Does that mean they're unhealthy? No, it means they're carrying another human being inside of their body.
It was just never factored in.
So BMI is a poor measure of health because it's a poor metric. So where it came from was way back. It was a population study of, let's do this measure and see kind of what the average is. It was done with men in European countries. So first of all, that excludes the women and excludes all these other cultures.
Okay.
And it was never meant to be applied to health. But then what happened was the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company got a hold of this metric and decided to, kind of measure, well, if a person's BMI is this, what's their likelihood of dying early? And so they had this bell curve that at the low ends and at the high ends, people were dying younger. So they were given higher life insurance rates.
Oh my, yeah. Interesting.
And that's where it got kind of circumvented into the healthcare system with no real good evidence. But it became a really simple way for doctors to kind of categorize people. Again, it's really problematic when it comes to applying it to women and applying it to other ethnicities. But it is what it is. That's how A lot of studies have now been formed. So when drugs come to market, they're studied a certain way and then they're approved based on that study. So if you said, okay, I'm only going to give this medication to people of BMI 30 and above, then that's how it becomes approved. It's only allowed to be given to people who have a BMI 30 and above, even though maybe people of a different BMI might still benefit from that medication. We didn't study it that way, so we can't put it to market that way. So BMI has become embedded into all of our guidelines and all of our recommendations without having really good evidence to support its use.
Interesting.
So I have a real beef with BMI.
Okay.
Real beef with BMI.
So is there a new metrics that can help us, or is it still stuck in that archaic system?
So if we want to talk about, like, BMI is applied to all these different areas in healthcare in ways that are inappropriate. But if we want to talk about obesity specifically, Canada has come a long way in redefining obesity separate from BMI. So in Canada, in 2020, new guidelines were released that were really leading in the world when it came to obesity management. If anyone's curious, you can find them at obesitycanada.ca. So Obesity Canada is a not-for-profit agency that its whole goal is to improve the lives of people living with obesity. So these guidelines redefine what obesity means in Canada. And then other countries have adopted this same kind of recommended definition. So in Canada, obesity is when your weight impairs your health.
Okay.
Simple as that. So we know BMI is still a thing. We know there are still the WHO classifications of obesity based on BMI. But in Canada, if your weight is negatively affecting your health, that's a diagnosis of obesity. And it doesn't necessarily matter if you're at a lower BMI, which we would have called overweight, between 27 and 30, or higher than 30, which would have been classified as obesity.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if my knees were hurting and you could make assumptions, maybe? I don't know. It's not assumptions.
So if you get your blood work done, you go to your doctor and your doctor says, your blood pressure is a little high, your cholesterol is a little high, your diabetes is on the horizon here, according to this blood work. If you lose weight, it might help.
Okay.
So you hear that a lot. You hear, weight loss might help. But how do you lose weight? Right? That becomes the difficult part. That becomes the part that people are kind of left out in the dark. If you were diagnosed with diabetes, your doctor would have a plan. Your doctor would say, these are the medications that I know can help you, manage your sugars in addition to diet and exercise. But with obesity, a lot of times you're just left with trying to figure it out on your own.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely talk about maybe what your approach is. But we could say that's like the conclusion or something.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think that's an important part. Is what you do. I think. And I guess let's go to another topic like nutrition, and we might land on two ends of the spectrum on this one. But when I do grocery shopping, I probably fall on the more organic side. But I'm not organic. I'm not vegan. I'm not any of those. I don't necessarily apply anything. But I'd like to see fewer ingredients.
Yep.
In my breads or in my potato chips. I guess if I'm buying potato chips, I like to see less processing. I know not everyone thinks like this in the medical community. Maybe would push towards something that's lighter or less fat, less sugar. But sometimes there's more things in there, and that's where my problem is that I just want to see 3 ingredients or 4 ingredients in my breads. You know what I mean? If it's got more, then maybe I won't buy it.
Yeah.
Obviously the butter, if it's the pure butter that's been churned.
Very few ingredients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then of course the margarines, it's like, what's going on?
Yep.
I know that you probably have something to say about those things, but that's how I choose my groceries based on those kind of
Simplicity.
factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were choosing your groceries by saying, I'm going to buy foods with no labels at all, you'd be the healthiest, right? What foods don't have labels?
Oh my. Let me think what you're saying here. You're not talking about chicken here, are you? Like,
No, but if you think about when you go to a grocery store, you're talking about reading
Apples?
ingredients
Yeah.
lists.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there are only certain foods that don't require labels at all, right? Labeling is a law that's put out by, Food and Drug Company, food. I can't remember what it's called in Canada, but there are foods that are exempt, and those are fruits and vegetables.
Okay.
So, if you're going to your grocery store and half of your cart doesn't have a label on it at all, you're doing good. Right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I first want to say, food companies are not your friend.
Okay.
Food companies are there to make money. So they're going to package their foods to make you want to buy them. They're going to... they're going to change their nutrition facts label to a smaller serving size so that when you look at those numbers, you think, oh, this one doesn't have as many calories, but it's actually only half the serving that you're actually going to eat. So there's all these tricks, right, that the food companies use to try to convince you to buy their foods. A great example of that, you mentioned potato chips. Mm-hmm. Potato chips are potatoes, fat, some kind of an oil, some kind of a salt, some kind of a flavoring. Should be fairly simple.
Yeah.
But if you look at the front of the bag, it's going to say, well, 10 years ago, it would have said cholesterol free. Okay. There's never, ever cholesterol in potatoes. Okay. Cholesterol is an
They're just
animal
advertising
product.
what it is. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But they're going to put all of these claims to try to convince you that their product is better. Right?
Yeah.
So looking at the ingredient list is one way of kind of getting away from the claims at the front of the package and looking at what's actually in the food. But sometimes there are things in foods that are perfectly safe, but they have big names, like riboflavin, for example. Well, that's just a B vitamin, right?
Okay.
So, there's lots of vitamins that get added to foods, and they're perfectly fine, but it does add all these big names on the back of the ingredient list.
Yeah.
So when it comes to buying your food, if we can, there is obviously a problem with eating a lot of ultra packaged foods. So things that are ultra processed that, no longer look like what it used to be, like Cheetos, for example. And we know they're delicious.
Super delicious.
But, what is it even? Like,
who cares, right? You just, yeah.
So, nobody's pretending that these are health foods. But when it comes to something like butter versus margarine, for example, it really depends on what margarine you're buying because they're different. So butter is simple. Butter is saturated fat. It comes from the fat of milk products, right? So when you milk a cow, you take the fat, you churn it, you add salt, and you manipulate it for so long that it turns solid.
Yeah.
In war times, back in like World War I, if soldiers wanted butter, it would go bad, right? Because it needs to be refrigerated. They didn't have, portable refrigerators. So they came up with a way of creating a solid fat that was much more shelf stable by hydrogenating an oil and making it solid. Great. It was a technological advancement.
Okay.
But sometimes it takes a long time for us to understand what that does to a person's health. So what we now know is that trans fats are bad for humans. So when you hydrogenate an oil and it changes the molecule of that fat to make it solid, it becomes something that our bodies don't process very well. So trans fats, based margarines, are actually worse for you than butter.
You heard that, folks. Yeah.
So the trans fats margarines are going to be the ones that are solid and wrapped in gold foil, like your Parquet margarine, right, in the block.
I see where you're going, yeah.
So in order to make a healthier margarine, you have to do it in a different way. So the soft tub margarines that say non-hydrogenated on the top actually take a little bit of solid fat, like butter or like coconut oil, and mix it with oil and some stabilizers, which are going to be some of those extra ingredients to make it solid But you can tell, something like that is very, very close to being a liquid. If you've ever left your soft tub margarine out on the counter overnight, you can see how soft it gets. That's because it's so close to being an oil. It's so close to being a liquid because the most of it is unsaturated fat. So something like that, yes, it has a lot of ingredients, but from a molecular point of view, it's going to look more like an oil to your body.
Okay.
So it's going to behave in your body more like an oil. Oh, I just touched that.
That's all good.
Probably did something.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to put those fats in order of, which ones do we know? What do we have the most information on as far as what fats do in our body? We know oils are good. So things like olive oil, canola oil, avocado oil, for example, good for us. We know they're not bad for our cholesterols, and our body needs good fats. The next one in line would be butter, saturated fats. Saturated fats can bring up our bad cholesterol if eaten in excess and if you have a genetic predisposition. So some people can eat all the saturated fats they want. It's never going to make them sick. And for some people, maybe you got to be careful.
Okay.
And then the trans fats are the worst, right? So unsaturated fats are the best. Saturated fats are kind of in the middle, and we're still doing a lot of research. And so, sometimes one research says this and the other research says that, but, a little bit is okay for sure. And trans fats are pretty bad.
Okay. That would be your, like pork? Where is trans fats? Like what's
trans fats are mostly man-made. So if you think about shortening, when you read Crisco shortening, the ingredient says oil. Well, how is it an oil? It's a solid. It's because it's been hydrogenated. So that hydrogenation process is man-made, and it makes that oil into a solid. And in doing that, it creates a fat that our body doesn't really recognize very well. And so what happens with trans fats, it actually brings up our bad cholesterol and lowers our good cholesterol. So cholesterol's purpose in our bloodstream is to move fat to where it goes, to where it's supposed to go.
Okay.
But we make cholesterol in response to the foods that we eat. So if we eat a lot of saturated fat, our body makes a lot of LDL, which is considered the bad fat, the bad cholesterol, to move that around. But LDL is really bad at its job. So sometimes it drops people off on the side of the road instead of bringing them where they're supposed to go. Okay. And so, if we have high levels of LDL in our bloodstream, that can lead to atherosclerosis, or that building up of plaque in the arteries that can then cause heart disease. So, So this is where the controversy lies with saturated fat.
Okay.
Is there are lots of studies that say limiting the amount of saturated fat in your diet is probably good for longevity. But there's also lots of people out there on the internet that are saying, no, saturated fat's great. Like, I eat lots of it and look at me, I feel great. So I think how your body responds is a lot to do with genetic risk and environment and the rest of your diet.
Okay.
So overall, a lot of people ask me, is it okay to eat butter? The answer is probably yes, depending on how much butter you eat.
Yeah.
Right? If it's a little bit of butter every, on your toast, once in a while, on your potatoes.
Because it's got 9 grams of, or 9, what's the word I'm looking for?
So all fats have 9 calories per gram.
So it's the highest calorie ratio.
But all of the fats have that same.
Fair enough.
So if it's an oil, it's 9 calories per gram. If it's butter, it's 9 calories per gram. If it's margarine, it's 9 calories per gram. The calories are going to be the same. But the quality of those oils and how they behave in your body might be different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there seems to be a campaign against seed oils lately. We don't have to touch that one, but...
I'm happy to touch it.
Yeah.
It's coming from a place of people trying to manipulate the market to sell their stuff.
Okay.
So there's no evidence to support eliminating seed oils. Seed oils are not really a thing anyway, but there's absolutely no evidence from a scientific point of view to...
I think if 3 people say it on TikTok, then it becomes true or something, right? So
ultimately, there is no one food that is 100% good or 100% bad. Like even trans fats, who, are pretty much, we know they're bad for you. And we've made strides to remove them from the food supply. A little bit of trans fats isn't going to hurt you either. Like, it's about how often you're doing
Okay.
that thing, right? I really love the 80-20 rule. Whatever you're doing 80% of the time is what's going to be affecting your health.
Okay.
So if 80% of the time you're eating a balanced diet full of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, limited processed foods, and that, then 20% of the time, if you want to eat flaming hot Cheetos, it's probably not going to hurt your health, right? Because it's only a small portion of what your entire diet looks like.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Now, my take on that too is like, I have a hard time labeling things as good or bad, only because our body listens to us. So if we say, oh, salt is bad, but 20% of the time, because if you're following the 80-20, you're going to eat the stuff that you've labeled as bad, then your body could reject it on a whole level of body, mind, and soul.
Well, it's the same as telling a kid when they're growing up that they're bad if they've misbehaved.
Right.
Like, no, that child is not inherently bad because they've made a bad decision. They're just dumb and they don't know any better. Food has no morality. Food holds no moral value. So eating McDonald's doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't make you a good person. It's morally neutral. But if the overall content of your diet is ultra processed, high in fat, high in sugar, high in salt, that is more likely to negatively affect your health.
Fair enough.
But ultimately, all foods can fit. So it's really, really important to try not to, especially when you're, like, I think about, raising kids with messaging, right? We grew up in a world where there was a lot of messaging around weight, and kids were bullied because of their weight. We grew up through the anorexic 90s where like Kate Moss body type was idolized, like really harmful messaging coming from media, coming from our parents and our parents' friends and like our communities. And that causes you to, think about food in a different way. So really, I'd really like to see a little bit more kind of neutrality when it comes to food, and talking more about getting back to, do you cook real meals? Do you eat fruits and vegetables?
Yeah, so oddly we do, but I know that's not the norm, right? So
it takes a lot more work to eat a healthy diet, and as humans, we tend to choose the path of least resistance. So when society shifted so that both parents had to work to keep things going, food companies met the moment there and said, oh, people are getting busy.
Right.
They don't have time to cook a big meal. They don't have time to spend all day in the kitchen. Let's provide a product we can sell that meets that need. And so all of a sudden processed foods were a thing, right? So TV dinners.
Oh yeah,
right.
Swanson's
TV
was
dinners.
that Hungry Man there? Oh my.
Yeah. That was not. That was a brand new thing. In the 60s or 70s.
Right.
That was a direct response to moms going to work, right?
Interesting.
So moms went to work. My mother worked. Your mother worked. So we didn't have the same amount of modeling on, this is how you organize cooking 3 meals a day out of your kitchen. So then we saw, more cold cereal for breakfast because it's quick and easy. Can of Chef Boyardee for lunch because it's quick and easy. And then if you live in an urban environment, let's order pizza for supper because it's quick and easy, right? Food can now be delivered right to your door, not to my door, not to where I live. Yeah. But, food companies are going to meet that demand. And because human beings tend to choose the path of least resistance, we're now to a place where we have generations of people who have not seen meals prepared in their homes.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something to be said about the way, maybe, I know this talks about the nuclear family and I don't really want to touch that too much, but the way we used to live might have been a little more holistic and well-rounded.
Absolutely.
I think, we had a support of grandparents at home. There was home-cooked meals, there's certain things that probably weren't great about those times, but there's certain things that really worked, I guess, so.
Yep. So it's complicated, right? And companies or people that go online and say, oh, all of the problem is with this food, fill in the blank, sugar, whatever. Like, you blame the thing. It's not that simple, right? There's so many things that changed in our society that affected the foods that we eat, that you cannot blame it on one simple ingredient.
Okay.
Right?
Which we used to do that in the 80s.
100%.
There was the fat and the sugar wars. And,
yep. Yeah. And that got us nowhere, right? That did not help anybody, right? So coming back to your question about, like, is it better to eat a food that has less fat or less sugar and they've been manipulated in that way? Really, it doesn't matter. They're really all the same.
Yeah, like light cheese. Should I buy light cheese? You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
If you like it, it's fine.
I'm concerned about what's in there instead, but
if you're trying to stay within a calorie budget and that helps meet your needs and you like it, sure.
There you go. Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Light cheese is essentially they've made the cheese with a lower fat milk content.
Yeah.
So, as far as processed things go, it's still minimally processed until you start looking at cheese slices or cheese whiz, right? So things get more and more and more processed. But, a block of cheese by itself, the light cheese is just, instead of starting with whole milk or cream, they started with a 2% milk.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, that's easy enough. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to talk about keto and those fun trends that I partook in. So like back in the day, it was the Atkins diet, which is kind of a version of keto.
Yep.
So I did that with great results, by the way. I lost a lot of water weight right off the bat, and we were eating like bacon or something. So that was amazing.
Yep.
But then something switched up here. And as soon as I was finished, I had to eat everything that I was denying myself. My brain kind of auto-corrected. And for years, I started gaining way more weight than I've ever lost. And so I don't know about those kind of things. There's some, approaches that are way more balanced,
right?
That maybe are more sustainable. The ketos and anyway, what are your takes on those kind of things? So
there's a lot to talk about there. So let's start with, Atkins or keto. So those are both essentially a really, really low carbohydrate diet. The first time I'd ever heard of a ketogenic diet was when I was in internship. So learning to be a dietitian, you have to do an internship in a hospital with other dietitians and you learn from them. A little boy had been admitted to hospital and he had seizures. So he had a seizure disorder and medications were not doing the job. He had such a severe seizure disorder that they put him on a ketogenic diet. So that was the original intent of ketogenic diet, was when you absolutely starve the brain of carbohydrates and it switches into ketone fuel, it calms seizure disorders.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that was my first introduction to a ketogenic diet. It was extremely limiting. I remember him being allowed one saltine cracker with about this much peanut butter on top, which is like, just imagine eating that.
300 calories or something, yeah.
But, a ketogenic diet, basically all of the calories, a large proportion of the calories come from fat. And like you mentioned before, fat is higher in calories. So the actual volume of food that you get to eat is quite limited. So it's a small amount of food because there's so much calories coming from fat. So ultimately, any diet that you partake in for the purposes of weight loss, in order for that diet to produce weight loss, you have to be in a calorie deficit. Okay. So can an Atkins diet work for weight loss? Yes, if you're in a calorie deficit. Does a keto diet work for weight loss? Yes, if you're in a calorie deficit. Can a low-fat diet work for weight loss? Yes, if you're in a calorie deficit. Right. Can a vegan diet work for weight loss? Yes, if you're in a calorie deficit. So that calorie deficit is the most important piece of the puzzle. So the advertising around these diets was, if you're in ketogenesis, it shuts off your hunger. So it makes it easier to eat less.
Right.
Is there good evidence to support that? Maybe in the short term, but whatever you do to lose the weight has to be what you continue to do to keep the weight off.
Okay.
That is the golden rule for weight loss. I tell it to my patients almost every time.
It's like a lifestyle.
Almost every, I wish I had a sign behind me, when I talk to people, because I talk to people online, virtually. I wish I had it like above my head as a slogan. I'd tattoo it to me.
That's
like,
yeah.
whatever you do to lose the weight has to be what you continue to do to keep the weight off.
So yeah,
Bar
good.
none.
Yeah.
Golden rule. But remember I mentioned before how our brain doesn't like weight loss.
You mentioned that, yeah.
So, you've got that golden rule that you have to continue doing what you did. But your brain is also going to start ramping up those hunger hormones. And it does that subconsciously without your control to try to get you to gain the weight back. So the calorie deficit becomes more and more difficult. And at the same time, as your body gets smaller, it burns less calories.
Makes sense, yeah.
If you used to have a calorie deficit of about 500 calories, as your body gets smaller, the calorie deficit gets smaller.
Yeah, because you have less weight walking around kind of deal. Yeah.
And at the same time, your brain is saying, oh my God, Sean, you got to eat more. You're going to die. You're going to die of malnutrition. So your hunger hormones are ramping up and it makes it more difficult to eat that low calorie. So your serving sizes start to get a little bit bigger.
Okay.
You start to say, oh, one little ice cream's not going to hurt.
So is it...
And then you end up in calorie balance. But your brain says, I don't want to ever go through that again. Let's keep those hunger hormones going up and up and up. So your brain will subconsciously say, oh, you got to eat those carbs. Come on, just do it. You've been so good. You've been working so hard. You deserve this treat. So your brain is going to give you all of these subconscious permission thoughts to go ahead and do it.
Okay.
And so that's how your brain gets you to eat those foods again.
That's why I had pizza for breakfast.
Yeah. And so it becomes really, really difficult to sustain that eating habit. So ultimately, whatever, if a person is trying to lose weight and if a person is trying to improve their health, it is vital that you choose an eating plan that you can live with, because you're going to be stuck with it for a long time.
So would you say that Saturday, Sunday cheat days are welcome because it helps with that, your body?
It's that 80, it's that 80-20 rule.
Okay.
So you really need to know yourself. There are some people who, can have an indulgence and say, okay, I'm going to kind of go off track a little bit and get back on track the next day. And everything's fine. You're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not going to trigger all of those negative permission thoughts that cause kind of a relapse in behavior. But there are some people that it's a little bit like a drug relapse. And having that food triggers kind of like an avalanche of wanting. And then it gets really, really difficult to kind of get those cravings under control again. So a person kind of needs to know themselves to know whether or not that is going to be risky behavior that's going to lead to more difficulties down the road.
Okay.
So it's not black and white.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, people really love black and white yes or no answers. And in nutrition, there is no such thing.
Yeah. Now, in your position, though, if you coach your client to follow whatever, we haven't got to what it looks like, but do you find that their accountability to you is important? And do some people listen to that? Or
there are some people who will say that they hear my voice when they open the fridge. Which is horrifying, because I don't want to be like their good angel on their shoulder kind of thing. But ultimately, my role as kind of like a behavior counselor or a dietitian is to help people understand why they eat the way they do, and understand why change is hard. And to understand what's their fault and what's not their fault. A lot of it is not their fault. And then to understand, okay, if these are the times that you're struggling, let's come up with some strategies to make it a little bit easier. So that's kind of where my role is with what we do at MWM, at Medical Weight Management, is the behavior management piece around helping people understand why they eat the ways that they do, understanding, what's underlying that, what's the brain process that's happening in that moment. And then once you kind of understand that, what do you have control over? So our brain has 3 parts that control our eating. 2 of them are unconscious that we can't control. So our homeostatic system lives in our hypothalamus. It's the really old part of our brain, switches hunger on and off. So it responds to a calorie deficit by switching on hunger. Then there's the second part of our brain, the mesolimbic part. That's the reward center of the brain. That's the part of the brain that learns. I like chocolate.
Right.
Chocolate makes me feel good. I want it.
Yeah.
You know, or when you go to the movies, you pair that with popcorn. So your brain learns when you go to the movies, you want to eat popcorn. So you go to the movies and your brain says, hey, where's my popcorn?
Yeah.
Right. So associative learning. That same mechanism that caused Pavlov's dog to drool when you rang the bell is the same mechanism that makes us want to eat snacks when we sit down on the couch at the end of the night to watch TV.
Interesting.
It's 100% associative learning.
For some reason, I've been able to shut off that after supper thing. Me and my wife have been doing it for years, so it's not an issue.
You've unpaired those.
Yeah.
You've unpaired those associations.
Yeah.
So it can be done, but you have to be motivated to do it. You have to want to make a change.
That's right.
Yeah, it can be done. Habits can be changed.
Now I know, so we associate food with celebration and we associate food with accomplishments, but we also associate food with depression too, where it's like comfort food. You know what I mean? So it's associated in every way, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So
100%.
We always gravitate towards it.
Yes.
In our failures and in our successes, right? So
and
it's
that's
huge.
Where it's so difficult, because it's the same part of the brain that, if you smoke cigarettes, we like cigarettes, so you crave cigarettes. But you can stop smoking cigarettes and kind of get over the withdrawal and be okay. You can't stop eating food. We need food.
That's a good point.
So it's not a black and white yes or no answer, right? So it becomes really difficult to say, well, I know what foods are healthy, but those aren't the foods I want to eat.
Okay.
Right? So the wanting comes from that reward center of the brain that says, that this food makes you feel good. And right now you want to feel good.
Now I know when, obviously I've had a good run of eating KFC for the last 15 years, but I've been making better choices, which is great. And KFC still sounds amazing, by the way. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, and I think this is how your brain can get retrained, but you have chicken and broccoli with a little olive oil on there and the right seasoning. And it can almost fulfill that. It's like, I didn't realize chicken and broccoli. I mean, that's a bad choice because that's kind of not very tasty, but some previously perceived foods that wouldn't interest me at all are delicious right now. So that's awesome, I guess.
It is. It's important to recognize that our taste buds change as we age as well. So if you think about the foods you were willing to eat when you were a kid, that really changes. Like coffee, for example, is not something that a kid can drink because it's too bitter.
Right.
So our taste buds do change as we age, but we're only going to be open to that if we are open to trying new things. So, if you've never eaten broccoli, you're never going to know that you like it because you've never tried it.
Yeah, it sucks on the first bite, but then,
So, where we fall short as a society is we stick to what we know, and we don't deviate a whole lot from the foods that we know we like. And we developed those tastes when we were kids.
They say everything that happens in your first 7 years becomes your foundation, right?
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really, really important, parents who are raising young kids, to continue to offer them a variety of new foods, even if they know they're probably not going to like it. It's the exposure. Again, you can't eat something you're not exposed to. So the exposure to new foods, the exposure to fresh vegetables, the exposure to home cooked meals is really important, because if you leave it up to the kid to decide what they want, they're always going to want the things that they know they like.
Right.
So it's always going to be chicken nuggets. It's always going to be grilled cheese because that's safe. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I see a new generation of kids, and it's not even new anymore. It's like craft dinner, hot dogs, pizza, and sometimes that's it. It's like, I'm going over for your turkey dinner, but I'm going to bring my own hot dogs. You know what I mean?
So I have a really great story. So again, worked at a hospital for 25 years. When I started working in the ICU, one of my first really memorable cases was a young man that came in he was 25 years old. So at this at this point, I wasn't even 25 years old. So this guy was only a couple years older than me. And he landed in the ICU with diabetic ketoacidosis. So really, really sick. He didn't know he had diabetes. His diet was limited to foods you could count on two hands. So I remember very clearly he would eat hot dogs, he would eat potatoes, he would eat Cheese Whiz, I think he would eat crackers, maybe bologna. It was literally the foods you'd count on two hands. And that was it. Those were the foods he was willing to eat. And it had started in childhood. He was a picky eater, and his parents had taken him to the doctor. The doctor had said he'll grow out of it.
Interesting.
But they had never pushed him to try new foods. Those were the foods they gave him, and he never moved out of that. And so now at 25 years old, he was extremely ill. He had the body of a 50-year-old, with the health issues of a 50-year-old, because he had not fed his body the right kind of nutrients, and also had not been physically active. He didn't have a job. The only time he went for a walk was to go to his grandparents' house or to the grocery store for more hot dogs.
Oh, nice.
It was such an example of where you could go wrong with, if you don't eat a good diet and you don't live a healthy lifestyle, you age so much faster.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, obviously, and we're not saying it, but there's a parenting issue component that, would have maybe fixed that if the parents could do the right choices. Yeah.
When we look at overall health, there's the social determinants of health, right? So we know people who have higher education levels tend to be healthier. People who make more money tend to be healthier, right? So, in this gentleman's case, this young man's case, he came from a low socioeconomic background. His parents were not well educated, and it led to making poor decisions that, my mom used to say, "Il fait au pitcher, ça vaut pas mieux."
Yeah.
Which in English means they're pitiful because they don't know any better. So, we shouldn't be talking about pity. We should be talking about elevating everyone in society to meet their basic needs. Right. And so when it comes now to switching the conversation back to obesity, we live in a two-tier system where people who have more money have more resources available for treatment. Because they can afford the treatment options, or they have insurance that covers their treatment options. But people who are low socioeconomic, have no money, cannot afford these treatments because they're not covered by our provincial healthcare system.
Okay. Let's talk about Ozempic and your thoughts about it. I don't necessarily have a whole lot. But what do you think?
So Ozempic is a diabetes medication.
Okay.
But it's the actual molecule is called semaglutide. So semaglutide is a GLP-1 receptor agonist. So what does that mean? So remember when I was talking about how our brain regulates appetite through a whole bunch of hormones?
Yes.
GLP-1 is a fullness hormone that our body naturally produces in our gut after we've eaten. So I'm going to give you an example of what GLP-1 does. You talked about grocery shopping. Tell me the difference between going grocery shopping on a full stomach versus an empty stomach.
Exactly.
What's that experience look like?
Well, I would say there's a lot more junk in your cart probably, instead of the basic nutrition.
If you're hungry.
Yeah, totally. If you're hungry,
So when we're in a hungry mode, when we're in a food-seeking mode, we're much more triggered by our outside influences. So our environment, which grocery store, you're surrounded by food, right? So, ooh, that looks good. I'm going to try that. And you end up buying extra stuff that you didn't have intention on bringing home. But when you go grocery shopping on a full stomach, what happens?
You just buy the basic needs, to be honest with you.
You make better decisions, right?
You plan your meals and whatnot.
You're able to think with your rational executive functioning brain.
Yeah.
You're able to make better decisions. You're able to make values-based decisions, thinking, what foods do I want to bring home to meet my goals, right?
Right, yeah.
That's what GLP-1 does. So GLP-1 goes to our brain and it switches off the food-seeking part of our brain, lets us think with that third part of the brain that controls food, the rational executive functioning part, the part that makes decisions. Our frontal lobe is short-lived. It has a small battery. And so when we're tired, when we're hungry, it's really hard to make good decisions. So GLP-1 that our body naturally produces goes to our brain after we've eaten, tells our brain, you're full, you can stop looking for food now, but it's short-lived. So a couple hours later, you're looking for food again. So Ozempic or semaglutide mimics that fullness hormone. So it goes up into your brain and it tells your brain, you can stop looking for food now, you're good. And it tells it that all week long. So there's a couple of different medications in this class. Ozempic is the one that is most widely known because it's the one that kind of took off.
Right.
But it's actually a diabetes medication. So it was prescribed off-label before a weight loss version of it was approved in Canada. So the weight loss version of it is actually called Wegovy. It's the same compound. It's semaglutide.
Okay.
But it's been, when they studied semaglutide for the purposes of weight loss, not diabetes, it was found to be effective at a higher dose. So Wegovy is actually dosed at a higher level than Ozempic is. So when we talk about obesity treatments, you know, if we know now that obesity is a chronic disease that behaves like a chronic disease, and because of all these influences in our brain that correct when you try to lose weight, we know that dieting alone doesn't necessarily work very well and can lead to more weight gain, which is more harmful in the long run. Well, then how do we help people achieve a healthier body and a healthier weight? We have to apply these treatments. So treatments that we know work are behavior management. So understanding those triggers and coming up with strategies to kind of mitigate that.
A counseling session, yeah.
Medications, and for some people, surgery. And so those pillars of treatment support the healthy eating and exercise that are so important. So the healthy eating and exercise are vital to helping people stay healthy, but they're not the treatments because by themselves, they don't lead to sustainable weight loss.
Okay.
So Ozempic or semaglutide or Wegovy or Mounjaro or Saxenda or Contrave, any of these medications that are now approved in Canada for the purposes of weight loss management are part of that medication pillar of treatment. Okay. So there's a bunch of different ones, but access to these medications is very limited because they're expensive. So to pay for Wegovy out of pocket, you're looking at over $400 a month. Mounjaro is another medication in this class that is, again, a diabetes medication, not yet approved in Canada for weight loss, but head-to-head trials of tirzepatide versus semaglutide, Mounjaro wins. You know, Mounjaro is actually more effective.
Okay.
It's just hasn't been marketed as well as Ozempic has.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Mounjaro is available in Canada as a diabetes medication. But again, it's very expensive out of pocket. And because it's not approved in Canada as a weight loss medication, if you have a diagnosis of obesity, you can't access that medication through your insurance because it's not indicated for that. So there's all of these complex parts of our healthcare system that are just not meeting the demand, not meeting the needs of people who have this chronic disease. And so why? It's because of the bias. It's because of the stigma. It's because for so many years, we were told, if you just try harder, if you just do better, you'll be better. It's your fault. Mm-hmm. Your weight is your fault. But science has proven over and over and over again, it's not. This is biological. This is physiological. It's not a person's fault if they're struggling with their weight.
Okay.
Your responsibility to help manage it is your own. But the fact that your brain is telling you to eat more food than you need is not your fault.
Now, how does like thyroids and stuff like that factor into this? Underactive thyroid.
Yeah. So underactive thyroid can cause a person to gain weight. And then, you get diagnosed with it. You get treated for it. But unfortunately, once you have that weight, it's really difficult to take it off. So there's all kinds of different medical reasons that might cause a person to gain weight. But ultimately, once you've got that weight, you've got it. It's really hard to get rid of it unless you don't have that genetic predisposition. So there's some people that just, 1 in 20 people who lose weight through diet and exercise can maintain it. It's 1 in 20.
Oh,
so
wow.
that one person out of 20 might not have had that same combination of genes and environmental exposure, and something, works, and they manage to keep it off.
Okay.
But the vast majority of us have this physiological background that makes it really difficult to lose weight and keep it off without treatment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was listening to, do you know who I mean by Coach Greg? Yes. So one of his things that he says is that if my goal weight was 200, let's say I was 300 pounds and I wanted to get to 200. He says you might not necessarily feel good when you get to your goal weight as you hoped you would. I don't know if there's any truth to that kind of statement, at least.
Absolutely, there's truth to that. Because, first of all, goal weights are problematic.
Okay.
Because, again, a lot of times these goal weights are based on these antiquated BMI charts that are not based in real good science. So a lot of people set their, they hope to lose weight and they set a target that might be a lot lower than what it should be. And it sets themselves up for failure. Because realistically speaking, when we talk about benefits of weight loss, your body benefits at just 5 to 10% weight loss. So if you have high blood pressure, pre-diabetes, high cholesterol, and you lose 5 to 10%, you actually will usually see benefits to that cholesterol, that blood pressure, so it doesn't have to be 100 pounds. It can just be 10 or 20 pounds, and you can start to see a health benefit.
Okay.
So coming back to Coach Greg.
Yes.
I went to university with Coach Greg.
There you go.
And I can tell you with great certainty, he does not have an obesogenic gene in his body.
There you go.
He's also trying to sell a product.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, yeah.
So I love Coach Greg's family very, very much. His little sister and my little sister were best friends. So, we're very closely tied. But Greg is coming from a lens where he doesn't have the same struggles with his weight.
Yeah, he's like a genetic...
He's blessed.
Yeah.
He would not have survived being a caveman.
Yeah, fair enough.
And so the trouble with anybody like Greg that's trying to sell services or sell, their diet plan is the disclaimer that it's probably not going to work long term is left off the contract, right? Yeah. So he's not talking about the physiological, biological, hormonal driven, unconscious changes that happen in the brain after dieting that will cause a person to make it very, very difficult to stay on that eating plan long term. Because if he did, nobody would sign up for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. A little controversial, but we're all good. Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know if you want to wrap up things we might not have touched on, if there's anything.
So one of the things, when we talk about pillars of treatment for obesity management, this all comes from the Canadian best practice guidelines for obesity management in adults, which are housed on Obesity Canada's website. So they're very easy to access. If anyone wants to learn more, that information is public. It's easy to find. It's easy to navigate. The website is obesitycanada.ca. Just simple as that. And it's all based in science. So we're not making this up. It's not just, I'm not trying to sell a product.
Yeah.
But it's really important to kind of understand that there are treatments that are available and the science is going to continue. So just because right now the landscape is that access to these treatments are limited, and not only access to medications, but access to surgery is also quite limited in Nova Scotia, but that's improving a little bit as well. So for some people, bariatric surgery, where a part of the stomach is removed, can actually be a really, really good treatment option. And that one's publicly funded. So if you can get, if you think, maybe surgery might be a good option, talk to your doctor about that, because there are pathways to get the surgery done in Nova Scotia, and it is covered.
Okay.
So people who have no money for long-term medication use, surgery is actually a good option. But again, these are treatments. The diet and exercise part is still a really important piece of it. So calorie deficit is still really, really important.
Right on.
It's just the treatments help to maintain the calorie deficit.
Okay.
The treatment supports the calorie deficit, but the calorie deficit is still really important.
Wow.
Yeah. So whether you're doing that calorie deficit through a vegan diet, a low carb diet, a low fat diet, an intermittent fasting diet, it doesn't matter. It has to be a diet that works for you.
Fair enough.
Right? So it's really about figuring out what works for me, what works for my schedule, my budget, because if you can't afford the food, that's not sustainable either.
Yeah.
But the sustainability of the changes is what's really important.
Yeah, I think you got to do what you like, or else
You have to like the food, and
you have to like going to the gym sometimes. I mean, that's part of the equation, right?
Yeah. So you have to be able to find a movement for your body that you enjoy. So for some people it's lifting weights, or going to the gym, or going for a run. For some people it's pickleball.
There you go.
Whatever floats your boat.
10,000 steps or whatever.
Yeah, whatever floats your boat. If you find a way to move your body every day or every other day that you can enjoy, that's probably the right exercise for you.
So I'm probably just going to be our last question. I think we're running out of time here, but so with your job, obviously, you were talking about the pillars and whatnot. There's surgery on one end. There was, medication.
Yep.
So what is your role into, can you only recommend certain things, or can you actually like prescribe?
As a dietitian, I cannot prescribe medications.
Yeah.
So in the job that I work with Medical Weight Management Center of Canada, we work, the program that we have is a year-long program. Unfortunately, it's not covered by provincial healthcare plans, so people have to pay out of pocket to join our program, but they have access to a doctor and a dietitian. So, and it goes for a whole year. So in that year, I meet with them over a dozen times, and we talk about the behavior stuff. We might talk about, we talk about nutrition as well, but most of the people coming to this program actually come with a wealth of nutrition information already, because they've tried it all. They've done Weight Watchers, they've done low carb, they've done in Ontario, there's the Bernstein diet. There's all these different diets that people have already tried and, unfortunately not able to sustain their weight loss. So we talk about why. We talk about that physiological response. We talk about the bias. Then we talk about, okay, what are we going to do about it? So then we talk about calorie deficit. We talk about how different treatments help manage that. So the doctors can actually prescribe the medications, but I'm actually the one probably answering more questions about.
Okay, so you can make recommendations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I talk to patients about sustainability a lot.
Yeah.
So if you cannot afford a medication, it's probably not a good idea to go on one.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't sustain that. Whatever you do to lose the weight has to be what you continue to do to keep the weight off. And so if you use a medication for weight loss, if you stop taking the medication, the weight comes back. And that's really, really important.
Yeah.
Not enough doctors tell their patients that at the beginning.
So you probably think twice before you recommend something, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not my life.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not my decision to make. I can give a person all the information that they need, but it's up to them to decide what fits with their life the best.
Now, because I work through Ignite, they're setting me up with a trial program. Apparently it's free to me, but they're going to set me up with a coach, and it's like an executive coach where they do some online mentoring. Mm-hmm. And this is what I have to do. I have to take pictures of my meals, and they're going to recommend a meal plan, which could be like 5 or 6 small meals a day. Send in pictures every day. And basically, if I gain weight, it's all going to be proven with these pictures and these calories that I've sent in every day. So that's like some huge amount of accountability, I guess. So I'm not sure what your thoughts are on those things, but
I'm not sure. I don't know. What kind of, is it AI based?
It's not AI based. It's a trial program for entrepreneurs. It's only available right here. It's just,
cool.
I'm not sure where it's going.
It sounds interesting. Mm-hmm. I'd be really curious to know, like, who's giving the feedback. Is there a dietitian looking at these pictures and saying, okay, maybe the carbohydrate to protein ratio might need to be tweaked or something like that. Like, I'd be really curious to hear like how it goes and what kind of feedback you get.
Me too.
And if you find it helpful, because ultimately healthy eating is tough.
Yeah.
Right? For all of those reasons that we talked about, healthy eating can be really difficult. So, yeah.
I think that they take into account like what you're capable of doing, what your daily tasks are, so that they can tailor it to what you can possibly do and not what they expect you to do, because that might be two different things, right? So,
exactly. So, unfortunately, at the beginning when you said, do you work with kids or adults? I said, adults who have control over their own environment are my jam.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I met a very nice man who had diabetes, and, he had a lot of questions about his diabetes, and come to find out, because he has developmental challenges, he doesn't live independently. He's not in charge of his own food. So he knows that eating certain foods make his sugars go up, but he's not the one making his food decisions. Somebody else is packing his lunch.
Interesting.
And they're not willing to make changes to his diet plan because probably they have a budget and that's what they can afford. So, we always have to look through the lens of what do you have control over and what do you don't have control over, right? So it's really always important to recognize that there are socioeconomic influences that govern why people do the things that they do. And we can't make assumptions that just because we have the privilege of being able to afford whatever food we want,
fair enough,
that not everybody has that. So, it'll be, I'd really like to hear more about what your, this program that you're.
I don't know if I let the cat out of the bag about that program, but
it'll be interesting to see, like, from your perspective, how does it work, and do you find it helpful, and ultimately, does it lead to long-term change?
Yeah,
because that's the goal, right? Is to establish long-term habits.
I think the idea is like it's balanced in a way that would keep the hangries away and all those things that make you want to eat. Like if I have a Pepsi this morning, I'm probably going to want a Pepsi 2 hours from now or something. So obviously it takes those glycemic index in.
Yeah.
So I think we can call it there. So unless you have something else, what are you up to?
Well, like I said, if you want to know more about the program that I work with, our website is mwmcc.ca. You'll find my picture there, as well as some of the other dietitians and doctors that work in that program. But yeah, I'm just really glad that I got a chance to have this conversation and spread the message a little bit today.
We could talk forever, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So let's end with a fist bump. Okay. Boom. And thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Pleasure. Take care.